David Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he emerged from the crystal caves beneath Ethos 7's surface, his geological scanner beeping softly in the dim light of the twin suns above. The mining colony had sent him out here to survey new deposits, but what he found in the deepest tunnel made his heart race with something far beyond scientific excitement. The creature lay curled against a wall of glowing crystals, its small body barely moving with each labored breath. David had seen many strange things during his 3 years as a xenobiologist on this volcanic world, but nothing quite like this. The being was no larger than a house cat, covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep blue to silver as the crystal light played across its form. 2 tiny bumps protruded from its shoulders where wings might someday grow, and its elongated neck ended in a delicate head with large, intelligent eyes that seemed far too knowing for such a small creature. Those eyes locked onto his the moment he crouched down beside it, and David felt something shift in his chest. The creature wasn't just sick, it was dying, the scales around. Its mouth had turned a sickly yellow-green, and strange crystalline growths jutted from its legs where the toxic minerals of this world had begun to poison its system. David had seen the same symptoms in some of the smaller native creatures, but they had all died within hours of exposure. This one was different, though. This one was fighting. "Hey there, little one," David whispered, setting down his scanner and reaching slowly into his field pack. He pulled out his emergency medical kit, knowing it was designed for humans but hoping some of the basic medicines might help. "I'm going to try to help you, okay?" The creature's eyes never left his face as he worked, and David could swear he saw gratitude in that alien gaze. He used tweezers to carefully remove the worst of the crystalline growths, cleaning each wound with antiseptic. The creature whimpered, sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but didn't try to pull away. When David offered it water from his canteen, it drank eagerly, its long tongue darting out to catch every drop. By the time David had done everything he could with his limited supplies, the twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He couldn't leave the creature here. The cave would be even colder at night, and there were predators that hunted in the darkness. But bringing an unknown alien species back to the colony was strictly against regulations. The mining company had clear rules about contamination and unauthorized contact with local wildlife. David looked into those intelligent eyes again and made his decision. The journey back to the colony took 2 hours, with David carefully cradling the creature inside his jacket. The being seemed to understand it needed to stay hidden, remaining perfectly still whenever they passed other workers or security patrols. David's quarters were in the research wing, isolated enough that he could sneak his unexpected patient inside without being seen. Once safely in his small apartment, David set up a makeshift medical bay on his kitchen table. He used his personal medical supplies, items meant for treating his own injuries in the field, to continue caring for the creature. The antiseptic seemed to be working. The yellow-green discoloration around its mouth was already fading to a healthier silver. The crystalline growths had stopped spreading, and when David offered it some of his emergency protein paste, the creature ate with surprising enthusiasm. "What are you?" David murmured as he watched his patient explore the small space he'd created for it. The creature moved with fluid grace despite its obvious weakness, investigating every corner of the makeshift habitat David had built from boxes and blankets. Its tail, long and elegant like a cat's but covered in those beautiful scales, twitched with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. As the days passed, David fell into a routine. He would leave for his regular duties each morning, checking in with the geology team and filing his reports about crystal deposits. But his mind was always on the small creature waiting in his quarters. He began bringing back samples of local plants and minerals, testing to see what might be safe for his patient to eat. The creature seemed to prefer the blue-tinged crystals that grew near underground water sources, crunching them between small but surprisingly strong teeth. It was during the 3rd night that David realized just how intelligent his patient truly was. He had been sitting at his desk, reviewing geological data on his tablet, when he felt something brush against his arm. The creature had climbed onto the table and was staring at the screen with obvious interest. David slowly tilted the tablet so they could both see it, and watched in amazement as the creature's eyes tracked the scrolling. "Data, you can understand this, can't you?" David asked softly. The creature looked up at him and made that wind chime sound again, but softer this time, almost like a purr. Then it did something that made David's breath catch. It reached out with one tiny clawed hand and touched the screen, where an image of crystal formations was displayed. The creature began to make different sounds, a complex series of trills and chimes that definitely wasn't random noise. It was trying to communicate. David grabbed a notebook and began sketching the crystal formations from the screen. The moment he finished drawing the first one, the creature became excited, making encouraging sounds and touching the drawing with one claw. They spent the next hour in this strange form of communication, with David drawing and the creature responding. The being seemed particularly interested in the deeper cave systems, areas David hadn't yet explored. It would point to his drawings and make questioning sounds, then move its claws in specific patterns that David began to recognize as a form of sign language by the end of the week. David had established a basic communication system with his patient, the creature, which he had started calling Spark because of the way its scales sometimes glowed with internal light, was clearly recovering. The yellow-green poisoning had disappeared, completely, and those tiny wing buds on its shoulders had begun to grow larger. Spark could now glide short distances across David's apartment, landing with surprising grace on furniture or David's shoulder. But it was the sounds Spark made at night that began to worry David every evening as darkness fell over the colony. Spark would position itself near the window and begin making those haunting wind chime calls. The sounds were different from the conversational trills they used during the day. These were longer, more complex melodies that seemed to carry an enormous sense of longing. Spark would sing for hours, its head tilted toward the sky as if calling to something far away. David tried to research what Spark might be, but the colony's database had limited information about Ethos 7's native species. Most of the records focused on the planet's mineral wealth and basic atmospheric data. There were notes about small scavenger creatures and some flying predators, but nothing that matched Spark's unique characteristics. The closest thing David could find were ancient legends from other worlds about dragon-like beings, but those were dismissed as folklore by most scientists on the seventh night. As Spark began its nightly song, David noticed something different in the sound. There was urgency now, almost desperation. The creature's call seemed to be getting stronger, reaching out across the darkness with increasing power. David pressed, his face against the window, looking up at the star-filled sky above Ethos 7, and wondered what his small friend was trying to reach. He was about to turn away when he saw it. A brief flash of light in the distance, too regular to be a meteor, too large to be a ship from the colony. David watched for several minutes, but the light didn't reappear. Still, something deep in his gut told him that whatever Spark was calling to might finally be calling back. Inside his quarters, Spark's song reached a crescendo, then slowly faded to silence. The creature looked at David with those intelligent eyes and made a soft, satisfied trill. For the first time since David had found it, Spark seemed truly at peace, as if something important had finally been accomplished. David settled into his chair beside the window, watching his unlikely companion curl up in its makeshift nest. The small creature that had changed his daily routine and challenged everything he thought he knew about life on Ethos 7 was clearly more than just another alien species. And tomorrow, David suspected he was going to find out exactly how much more. 3 weeks after that strange light in the sky, David's world changed forever in the most unexpected way possible. He was reviewing mineral samples in his laboratory when Spark suddenly appeared beside his microscope, scales glowing with an intensity he'd never seen before. The creature looked directly at him and made a sound unlike any of its previous communications, deeper, more resonant, almost musical. Then the images began flowing into David's mind. At first he thought he was having some kind of medical episode. The pictures came in waves, vast expanses of space filled with creatures that looked like Spark, but enormous beyond imagination, their scales catching starlight as they moved through the void like living ships. David stumbled backward from his workbench, pressing his palms against his temples, but the images kept coming. He saw battles among the stars, with those massive dragon-like beings fighting against something else. Dark, twisted shapes that seemed to devour light itself. He saw planets being consumed, their surfaces stripped bare by mechanical swarms that left nothing but empty rock behind. And through it all, he saw the dragons falling, their numbers growing smaller, with each conflict until only scattered groups remained hiding in the far reaches of space. "Spark?" David gasped, looking down at the small creature that had somehow planted these visions in his mind. "What are you showing me?" The creature's eyes met his, and suddenly the images became more focused. David saw a specific group of the massive beings, 12 of them moving together through an asteroid field. Their scales were different colors, some deep red like cooling lava, others brilliant gold or silver. One was pure white with edges that seemed to shimmer like heat waves. This was Spark's family, David realized with sudden certainty. These were the beings his small friend had been calling to every night. The next image made David's heart clench with understanding. He saw the white-scaled dragon, clearly the leader of the group, engaged in fierce battle with a swarm of the dark mechanical creatures. The other dragons fought desperately around their leader, but they were outnumbered. The mechanical things wrapped around them like a living net, and in the chaos David saw something small and bright fall away from the battle, tumbling through space toward a distant planet. "You," David whispered, understanding, flooding through him. "You fell away during the fight. They don't know where you are." Spark made that wind chime sound again, but sadder now, filled with loss. David reached out and gently stroked the creature's head, feeling the warmth of its scales beneath his fingers. The images in his mind shifted again, showing him things that made his scientific training rebel against what he was seeing. These weren't just large animals, they were ancient, intelligent beings with their own culture and language. They built things, created art that spanned solar systems, and protected younger species from threats beyond imagination. They called themselves the Drachnari, and they were among the oldest, sentient races in the galaxy. Each one could live for thousands of years, growing larger and more powerful with age, but they were dying out. The mechanical creatures, the Ravagers as the dragons called them, had been hunting the Drachnari for millennia, following them from system to system, consuming everything in their path. The dragon species that had once numbered in the millions now counted only a few hundred survivors scattered across the galaxy. Worse yet, very few young ones like Spark survived to maturity. The Ravagers specifically targeted the juveniles, knowing that destroying the next generation would ensure the dragon's extinction. David sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Spark was sharing with him. This small creature he'd rescued from a cave wasn't just some local wildlife. It was potentially one of the last hope for an ancient civilization. And somehow, through his act of healing, he had become part of their story in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. "Your family," David said carefully. "They're still looking for you, aren't they?" The images that flowed into his mind now were different. More recent, they showed the 12 dragons moving from system to system, searching desperately for any trace of their lost young David. Saw them investigating asteroid fields and abandoned planets, calling out with sounds that could travel between stars. The white dragon led them with single-minded determination. Refusing to give up despite the growing danger from Ravager patrols, Spark's small form seemed to glow brighter as more images filled David's consciousness. Now he could see what the creature had been doing during those nightly songs. Spark had been sending out a signal, a specific frequency that only other Drachnari could detect, but the small being was still too young and weak to send the signal very far. It needed time to grow stronger, or it needed help amplifying its call. "The crystals," David said suddenly, remembering how Spark had been interested in the blue mineral formations. "You've been trying to use them to boost your signal, haven't you?" The creature's excited trill confirmed his guess. Spark projected new images showing how adult Drachnari could use certain crystalline formations to amplify their communications across vast distances, but Spark was too small to properly interface with the crystals alone. It needed something else, someone else, to help make the connection. David looked at his hands, remembering how Spark's scales had glowed when they first made contact during the healing process. Somehow, the bond formed between them when David saved Spark's life had created a connection that went both ways. David could receive the mental images, but maybe he could also help send them. "You want me to help you call them," David said, understanding dawning. "But if I do that, if we manage to contact your family, they're going to come here to Ethos." The images Spark shared next showed David exactly what that would mean. 12 beings, each hundreds of meters long, more powerful than any human spacecraft, arriving at a small mining colony that had never encountered intelligent alien life. The reaction would be panic, possibly violence. David could imagine the colony's defense systems trying to engage creatures they couldn't possibly fight, or the mining company's corporate response to discovering that their supposedly empty world was actually inhabited by ancient dragons. But as David looked into Spark's eyes, he realized he didn't have a choice. The creature had been separated from its family for months, possibly years in dragon time. Every day it remained lost was another day its people would spend searching instead of hiding from the Ravagers. And if the mechanical creatures found the 12 dragons before they found Spark, David's small friend would be alone in the universe forever. "Okay," David said quietly, making a decision that would change everything. "We'll do it, but we need to be smart about this. We need to find the right crystals, and we need to prepare the colony for what's coming." Spark's scales brightened until the creature looked like a small star, and David felt waves of gratitude and affection flowing through their mental connection. But underneath those positive emotions, he also sensed something else, a deep, ancient sadness and a weight of responsibility that seemed far too heavy for such a small being to carry. As David began planning how to help Spark contact its family, he couldn't shake the feeling that rescuing one small creature from a cave was about to have consequences that would ripple across the galaxy. The simple life of a xenobiologist studying mineral formations was ending. Whether what came next would be better or worse remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. David Chen was about to become the first human in history to facilitate first contact with one of the galaxy's most powerful and mysterious species. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, 12 ancient beings continued their desperate search for the small spark of hope that David now held in his hands. The amplified signal worked better than David had ever imagined possible. Using the colony's mining equipment to create a crystalline resonance array, he and Spark had managed to send their call far beyond Ethos 7's atmosphere. But David hadn't expected the response to come so quickly or to be so overwhelmingly powerful. The colony's long-range sensors detected them first. 12 massive signatures dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Colony Administrator Wells burst into David's lab without knocking, his face pale with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Chen, what the hell did you do?" Wells demanded, waving a data tablet that showed sensor readings unlike anything in the colony's database. "We've got 12 objects incoming, each one the size of a battleship, and they're not responding to any of our communication attempts. They'll be here in 6 hours. David looked down at Spark, who was practically glowing with excitement, tiny wings fluttering as the creature sensed its family's approach. "Administrator, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible." "Try me," Wells said grimly before David could answer. Alarms began blaring throughout the colony. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the automated defense systems activated. David felt Spark's distress through their mental connection. The creature could sense its family's confusion and growing anger as human weapon systems locked onto them. "Shut down the defenses," David said urgently. "Those aren't enemy ships. They're living beings and they're here for Spark." "Spark?" Wells looked around the lab until his eyes fell on the small dragon-like creature perched on David's shoulder. "That thing you've been hiding? Chen, if you've made unauthorized contact with an alien species, I saved its life," David interrupted. "And now its family has come to collect it. But Administrator, these beings aren't like anything we've ever encountered. They're ancient, intelligent, and more powerful than our entire fleet combined. If we treat them as hostile, they will respond in kind." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. David found himself in the colony's command center, trying to explain dragon psychology to military officers who looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Spark remained on his shoulder throughout the briefings, occasionally projecting images into David's mind that he tried to translate for the increasingly nervous human leadership. "They're called Drachnari," David explained for the third time. "They're not just animals, they're an ancient civilization that's been protecting younger species for millennia. The one I rescued is essentially their equivalent of royalty, and by saving its life I've created what they call a life debt between our species." Colonel Martinez, the colony's military commander, shook his head skeptically. "You're telling me that 12 dragon-sized aliens are approaching our colony because you played veterinarian to something the size of a house cat, and they're going to be friendly about it?" "The life debt is sacred to them," David insisted, feeling Spark's agreement through their connection. "When someone saves a Drachnari's life, that person becomes part of their pack, the entire family group, becomes bound to protect them. It's not just gratitude, it's a fundamental part of their culture." As if summoned by their conversation, the first dragon appeared in Ethos 7's atmosphere. David watched through the command center's main screen as something impossible descended from the clouds. The being was magnificent beyond description, easily 300 meters from nose to tail, with scales that shifted from deep red to gold as it moved. Wings that could have covered the entire colony stretched wide as the creature slowed its descent, and David could see intelligence burning in eyes the size of shuttlecraft. 11 more followed, each unique in coloration and size. The largest was pure white with silver edges, clearly ancient beyond measure. Its presence seemed to make the air itself vibrate with power. The smallest, though still massive by human standards, displayed scales of deep purple that sparkled like jewels. The others ranged through every color David could imagine, each one a masterwork of natural engineering that made human spacecraft look clumsy and primitive by comparison. The white dragon landed first, choosing a flat area just outside the colony's main perimeter. Its massive head lowered until those enormous eyes could focus on the command center where David and the others waited through Spark. David could feel the ancient being's attention settling on him like the weight of mountains. "That's Emberwing," David said, somehow knowing the creature's name through his connection with Spark. "She's the pack leader, probably over 2,000. Years old. She's Spark's great-grandmother, and she's been searching for months." The mental contact came without warning, overwhelming David's consciousness with the force of an ancient intelligence that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Emberwing's mind touched his, and David found himself experiencing emotions and concepts that human language couldn't properly express. He felt the dragon's relief at finding Spark alive, her gratitude toward the human who had saved her descendant, and underneath it all, a deep sadness that spoke of countless losses over the centuries. But most importantly, David felt the weight of the life debt settling into place. It wasn't just Emberwing's acknowledgement of what he'd done, it was a fundamental change in how the entire pack would view humanity. David Chen was no longer just another alien species, to be ignored or avoided. He was pack brother family, worthy of protection and loyalty that would last for generations. The communication lasted only seconds in real time, but David emerged from it feeling fundamentally changed. He looked around the command center at the tense faces of his fellow humans and realized that everything he'd experienced was about to become their new reality. "She wants to speak with us," David announced, "but not here in the open where her pack can see and hear everything that happens. She says it's important for all of them to witness the formal acknowledgement of the life debt, Administrator." Wells swallowed hard. "And if we refuse?" David felt Spark's amusement through their mental link, followed by images of what 12 angry Drachnari could do to a small human colony. The mental pictures were vivid enough to make him grateful that the dragons were feeling friendly. "I don't think refusal is really an option," David said diplomatically. "But Administrator, this could be the most important moment in human history. We're not just meeting another intelligent species, we're being invited to join one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations." An hour later, David found himself walking across the open ground between the colony and the dragon pack, with Spark riding on his shoulder and a small delegation of nervous humans following behind. The 12 Drachnari arranged themselves in a semicircle, their massive forms creating a natural amphitheater around the meeting space. Each dragon was unique, but all of them radiated the same ancient intelligence and quiet power that David had felt from Ember Wing. The pack leader herself descended from her perch on a rocky outcropping, moving with surprising grace for something so large. When she was close enough, David could see his own reflection multiplied dozens of times in the faceted surface of her enormous eyes. Emberwing lowered her great head until it was level with David's chest, and spoke. The sound that emerged wasn't quite like Spark's wind chime communications. It was deeper, more complex, like the song of whales mixed with the resonance of cathedral bells. But somehow, through his connection with Spark, David understood every nuance of meaning. David Chen of the human pack. Emberwing's voice seemed to vibrate through his bones. You have given life to our young when death claimed it. You have shown kindness to a being not of your species when you owed it nothing. You have proven that your people possess the spark of compassion that marks true civilization. David felt the weight of 11 other ancient gazes upon him as Emberwing continued. By the old laws and the deep bonds that hold our people together, we name you Pack Brother. Your life is our life. Your enemies are our enemies. Your young are our young to protect and guide. The other dragons joined their voices to hers, creating a harmony that seemed to make the ground itself vibrate with power. David felt something fundamental shift in the universe around him, as if reality was recording this moment and etching it into the basic laws of existence. The life debt wasn't just a cultural tradition, it was something deeper, a binding that would affect not just David but potentially all of humanity. As the ceremony concluded, David looked up at the magnificent beings surrounding him and realized that the quiet life of a mining colony xenobiologist was officially over. He was now the first human pack brother to an ancient dragon civilization, and whatever came next would determine whether humanity's first contact with true galactic power would lead to unprecedented alliance or unimaginable consequences. Above them all, Spark spread its small wings and sang with pure joy, finally reunited with the family that had never stopped searching. David's new life as humanity's first dragon pack brother lasted exactly 8 days before everything went wrong. The colony had just begun to adapt to having 12 massive Drachnari living nearby, with scientists studying their incredible biology, and engineers marveling at how beings so large could move through space without any visible technology. Then the long-range sensors detected something that made Emberwing's ancient eyes burn with a fury that had been building for millennia. Ravagers had found them. David was in his expanded laboratory. The dragons had helped the humans build a much larger research facility using techniques that seemed to blend organic growth with mechanical precision. When Spark suddenly went rigid, on his shoulder every scale on the small dragon's body flared bright red, and David felt waves of terror and rage flowing through their mental connection. Outside, the sound of 12 massive dragons roaring in unison shook the colony's buildings. Emberwing's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, speaking directly into David's mind with an urgency that made his teeth ache. Pack Brother, the Devourers come. They have followed our trail across the void, and now they bring death to your world and ours. Gather your people. This place will become a battlefield before the next sun sets. David ran to the command center, where Administrator Wells and Colonel Martinez were staring at sensor readings that defied comprehension. The approaching fleet registered as over 300 objects, each one pulsing with energy signatures that seemed to eat light itself. The vessels, if they could even be called that, appeared to be alive, their surfaces writhing and shifting like metallic skin. "What are we looking at?" Wells demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled panic through Spark. David could see what the dragon saw, and the images flowing into his mind made his stomach clench with dread. The Ravagers weren't just another alien species. They were something that had abandoned biological life entirely centuries ago. Their ships were extensions of their cybernetic bodies, part machine and part corrupted flesh, designed for one purpose: consuming entire worlds and converting the raw materials into more of themselves. They're called Ravagers, David explained, trying to keep his voice steady. According to the dragons, they were once a normal species, but they modified themselves so extensively that they lost everything that made them alive. They can't reproduce naturally anymore, so they survive by stripping other worlds bare and using the resources to build more of their kind. Colonel Martinez studied the tactical display with professional focus. Numbers? The dragons count over 300 vessels, but each ship can spawn dozens of smaller units once they begin planetary assault. David felt Spark's distress as more details flowed through their connection. They've been following the Drachnari for thousands of years, hunting them specifically because adult dragons are one of the few things in the galaxy that can actually fight them effectively. And now they've followed the dragons here. Wells said grimly, to our world. The next few hours revealed the true scope of what humanity had stumbled into Emberwing, and her pack shared their accumulated knowledge of Ravager tactics through their mental link with David, painting a picture of cosmic horror that made human. Wars seemed like children's games. The mechanical beings didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them completely, breaking down everything from the atmosphere to the planetary core, and rebuilding it all into more ships, more weapons, more Ravagers. But the dragons also shared something else. Hope. The Drachnari had been fighting this enemy for millennia, and, while they were losing the overall war, they had learned how to hurt the Ravagers. Individual battles could be won, especially when the dragons had allies and favorable terrain, and Ethos 7, with its unique crystalline formations and volcanic activity, offered possibilities that both species could exploit. Your people build things we cannot, Emberwing explained during an emergency strategy session held in the open air, so all 12 dragons could participate. You shape metal and energy with precision that rivals our own abilities, but in different ways. We have power and ancient knowledge, you have innovation and adaptability. Together we might accomplish what neither species could achieve alone. David found himself serving as translator and coordinator as humans and dragons worked together to prepare for the coming assault. The mining equipment that had seemed so mundane just days before was rapidly converted into weapons systems. The massive ore extractors became kinetic bombardment platforms, while the crystal refineries were modified to produce focused energy beams that could cut through Ravager armor. The dragons contributed their own capabilities in ways that amazed the human engineers. Emberwing demonstrated how adult Drachnari could channel stellar energy through their bodies, essentially becoming living weapons of immense power. The younger dragons showed how they could use the planet's magnetic field to accelerate projectiles to incredible velocities, and all of them possessed an innate understanding of three-dimensional combat that came from millennia of fighting in the void between Starspark. Despite being the smallest dragon present, proved crucial to the alliance. The young Drachnari could interface directly with human computer systems through its connection with David, allowing real-time coordination between the two species. Very different technologies. David watched in amazement as his small companion learned to pilot human machinery through pure thought, becoming a living bridge between biological intuition and mechanical precision. As the Ravager fleet drew closer, David began to understand the true magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just an attack on one human colony. It was a battle that would determine whether two species could stand together against an enemy that had consumed countless worlds. The outcome would either prove that cooperation could overcome even the most ancient evils, or it would add humanity to the long list of civilizations the Ravagers had devoured. The dragons had chosen to make their stand here not just because Spark was present, but because they recognized something in humanity that gave them hope. For the first time in centuries, humans were young and innovative, capable of thinking in ways that even ancient dragon wisdom couldn't match. If the alliance could hold, if the two species could truly work as one, then maybe the tide of an endless war could finally be turned. On the evening before the Ravagers were expected to arrive, David stood with Emberwing on a ridge overlooking the colony. Below them, humans and dragons worked side by side, preparing weapons and defenses that neither species could have created alone. The sight filled him with a mixture of pride and terror. Pride at what they had accomplished together, and terror at what they were about to face, Pack Brother. Emberwing said softly, her massive head lowering until her eyes were level with his. You have given us more than the life of one young dragon. You have given us hope that this ancient war might finally end. But the battle ahead will test both our species in ways that cannot be undone, win or lose. Neither humans nor Drachnari will be the same when it is over. David reached out and placed his hand on the warm scales of the ancient dragon's snout, feeling the weight of history and the promise of an uncertain future. Then we'll make sure it's a change worth making. Above them, the stars began to disappear as the Ravager fleet blocked out the light, and David knew that by tomorrow, the galaxy would discover whether the alliance between humanity and dragonkind could survive its first true test. Dawn never came to Ethos 7 that day. Instead, the sky filled with mechanical horrors that blotted out the twin suns and cast everything below into an artificial twilight that reeked of ozone and burning metal. David watched from the newly constructed command center as the first wave of Ravager attack craft descended like metallic locusts, their surfaces rippling with biomechanical components that seemed to pulse with malevolent life spark clung to his shoulder, no longer the small creature he'd rescued from a cave. The young dragon had grown rapidly over the past weeks, now almost the size of a large dog, with wings that could actually support short flights. David could feel the creature's mixture of excitement and terror through their mental bond. This would be Spark's first real battle, the moment it proved itself worthy of the ancient lineage it carried. All units, this is command. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled over the communication system. Remember, we're not just fighting for the colony. We're fighting to prove that two species can stand together against extinction. Drachnari pack leaders, you are cleared for independent action. Human teams, coordinate through your assigned dragon partners. May whatever gods watch over us, all have mercy. The first engagement began 3 kilometers above the colony's main dome. Emberwing led the dragon formation in a climbing spiral that intercepted the lead Ravager ships before they could begin their planetary bombardment. David watched through the command center's enhanced viewing screens as the ancient white dragon opened her massive jaws and released a stream of energy that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. The beam carved through 3 Ravager vessels before they could react, turning their biomechanical hulls into rapidly expanding clouds of superheated debris. But the Ravagers adapted quickly, just as the dragons had warned they would. The mechanical beings began spreading their formation, using their superior numbers to surround individual dragons and overwhelm them with coordinated attacks. David felt his heart clench as he watched the purple-scaled dragon, barely 50 years old and still considered young by Drachnari standards, disappear into a swarm of smaller Ravager fighters. All human artillery units, focus fire on Grid 77 Alpha. David called out, coordinating the ground-based response through his link with Spark. We've got one of our dragons trapped in there. The mining equipment that had been converted into weapon systems proved more effective than anyone had dared hope. The massive ore extractors launched chunks of crystallized metal at velocities that turned them into kinetic projectiles capable of punching through Ravager armor. The energy beam arrays designed to cut through solid rock sliced apart the mechanical attackers with surgical precision, and all of it was coordinated through the mental link between David and Spark, allowing human technology to respond with the same 3-dimensional thinking that made the dragons such effective space fighters. The purple dragon burst free from the Ravager swarm, its scales dim with exhaustion, but its spirit unbroken. It immediately joined a formation with 2 other Drachnari, and together they began a coordinated assault on one of the larger Ravager command vessels. David felt a surge of pride through his connection with Spark, not just his own emotions, but the young dragon's fierce joy at seeing its packmates fighting with such skill and courage. As the battle intensified, David found himself thinking less like a xenobiologist and more like a warrior. The careful scientific mindset that had defined his life gave way to something more primal, more immediate. He wasn't just coordinating between species anymore. He was fighting for the survival of both humans and dragons, for the future of an alliance that had been born in compassion and was now being tested in fire. The turning point came when the Ravagers deployed their planetary assault platforms, massive biomechanical structures that began descending toward the colony's main population centers. Each platform was the size of a city block, bristling with weapons that could reduce the human settlement to radioactive ash within minutes. The Dragon Pack immediately moved to intercept, but there were too many platforms and not enough dragons. David. Emberwing's voice echoed in his mind filled with ancient determination. Your people's mining systems, can they be used to destabilize the planet's crust? David felt Spark's excitement as the young dragon understood what the pack leader was suggesting. The crystalline formations that made Ethos 7 valuable for mining also made it geologically unstable. A precisely placed explosion in the right location could trigger a chain reaction that would create artificial volcanic eruptions, dangerous for everyone on the surface, but potentially devastating for the Ravager platforms that were designed for void combat rather than geological disasters. It's risky, David responded through the mental link. We'd have to evacuate the surface completely, and there's no guarantee we could control the eruptions once they start. Pack brother, we are dragons. We were born in the hearts of stars and forged in the void between worlds. A few volcanic eruptions are not beyond our ability to survive, and your people have ships that can carry them to safety. The Ravagers, however, are not prepared for a planet that fights back. The next hour was a frantic coordination of evacuation and demolition. While the battle raged overhead, human civilians were loaded onto transport ships and lifted to orbital stations, while dragon-human teams placed precisely calculated explosive charges in the planet's most unstable crystal formations. The work was dangerous. Ravager fighters constantly strafed the work sites, forcing the teams to fight their way from one target to the next. David found himself riding on Spark's back as they raced between demolition sites, the young dragon's growing strength allowing it to carry him through aerial maneuvers that would have been impossible in any human aircraft. Spark's scales had developed a new pattern during the battle, shifting from blue-silver to deep red when the dragon was channeling energy for combat. David could feel his companion's fierce pride at finally being able to fight alongside the pack, no longer just a rescued hatchling, but a true warrior of the Drachnari bloodline. When the charges finally detonated, the effect exceeded everyone's expectations. The crystalline formations created a resonance cascade that triggered eruptions across 3 continents. Volcanic plumes shot into the atmosphere, creating electrical storms that interfered with Ravager communications and navigation. The biomechanical assault platforms designed for the sterile environment of space found themselves trying to operate in conditions that corroded their systems and disrupted their coordination. The dragons, meanwhile, seemed to thrive in the chaos. Emberwing led her pack through the volcanic storms like they were flying through their natural element, using the electrical disturbances to mask their approach and the volcanic heat to supercharge their energy projection abilities. The tide of battle began to turn as Ravager vessels, one by one, fell victim to dragon attacks they couldn't detect until it was too late. The final engagement took place in orbit above the burning planet. David watched from the relative safety of an evacuation ship as Emberwing confronted the Ravager command vessel in single combat. The ancient dragon had grown to her full size during the battle, her scales now blazing with energy that made her visible even from thousands of kilometers away. She moved through space like a force of nature, her massive form dwarfing even the largest Ravager ship. The command vessel tried to retreat when it became clear that the battle was lost, but the other 11 dragons had positioned themselves to cut off any escape routes. In the end, the biomechanical horror found itself facing not just Emberwing, but the coordinated assault of an entire dragon pack backed by human weapon systems. The explosion when it died was visible from 3 star systems away. As the last Ravager fighters were hunted down and destroyed, David felt a profound change in his connection with Spark. The young dragon was no longer the frightened, sick creature he'd found in a cave. Instead, it had become a true member of the pack, tested in battle and proven worthy of the ancient bloodline it carried. David felt Spark's gratitude not just for the original rescue, but for everything that had followed. The chance to grow, to fight, to prove itself alongside both dragons and humans. The battle was won. But as David looked down at the volcanic hellscape that Ethos 7 had become, he realized that both species had been changed in ways that went far beyond the immediate victory. They had proven that cooperation was possible, that 2 very different forms of intelligence could work together to overcome seemingly impossible odds. But more than that, they had created something new, a true alliance between species that had the potential to reshape the galaxy itself. The Ravagers had been hunting the dragons for millennia, but now they would face not just ancient dragon power, but human innovation as well. And somewhere in the depths of space, other Ravager fleets would eventually learn that their long campaign of galactic conquest had finally met its match. 6 months after the Battle of Ethos 7, David Chen stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching something that would have been impossible to imagine just a year before. Below him, human children played alongside young dragons, in specially designed parks where both species could thrive together. The station itself was a marvel of joint engineering, part human technology, part dragon bioarchitecture, creating spaces that felt both familiar and wondrously alien. Spark landed beside him with the graceful power of a creature that had grown into its true nature. The dragon was now nearly 30 meters long. Its scales shifted through patterns of deep blue and silver that reflected its mood, and the stellar radiation around them Spark's wings, once tiny buds on a dying hatchling's shoulders, could now carry both dragon and rider across interstellar distances at speeds that human ships couldn't match. "Hard to believe how much has changed," David said, running his hand along Spark's warm neck. The mental connection between them had evolved as well. No longer the desperate communication between rescuer and rescued, but the deep bond between pack brothers who had fought side by side and emerged stronger. Through the observation window, David could see the construction of what would become the first joint human Drachnari exploration vessel. The ship was massive even by dragon standards, designed to carry both species on missions that would take them to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, where other Ravager fleets might be threatening younger civilizations. The vessel's hull incorporated human metallurgy with dragon bioengineering, creating something that was somehow alive while still being unquestionably a machine. Emberwing's mental voice touched David's consciousness with the warmth of ancient affection. "Pack brother, the Council of Packs has reached their decision. All 12 remaining dragon clans have agreed to the alliance. Your species will be offered protection and partnership in exchange for your technological innovations and tactical flexibility. The age of isolated struggle is ending." David felt a mixture of pride and responsibility that made his chest tight. The Council of Packs represented every surviving group of dragons in the galaxy, being so ancient that some remembered when humans were still discovering fire by accepting humanity as true allies rather than just temporary partners. They were fundamentally changing the balance of power in a universe where the Ravagers had held dominance for far too long. The formal ceremony took place in the station's central chamber, a vast space designed to accommodate beings ranging from human-sized to creatures larger than most buildings. Representatives from dozens of human colonies attended via hologram, while 7 additional dragon packs had traveled across the galaxy. To witness the historic moment, David found himself standing at the center of it all, still somewhat amazed that a simple act of compassion toward a dying creature had led to this. "Let it be recorded in the deep memories of both our peoples," Emberwing intoned, her voice resonating through speakers designed to carry dragon communication, "that on this day, the species known as humans are welcomed into the ancient alliance of civilized worlds. They have proven their worth not through conquest, but through compassion. Not through domination, but through cooperation. They are declared pack kin to all Drachnari, with all the rights and responsibilities that such kinship entails." The response from the human representatives was immediate and unanimous. Acceptance of the alliance and all its implications. David felt tears on his cheeks as he realized that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. They had found not just allies but family among the stars, and the future that stretched ahead was brighter than anything previous generations could have imagined. But the ceremony was just the beginning. The real work started in the weeks that followed, as human and dragon teams began coordinating efforts. Across multiple star systems, the Ravagers had been quiet since their defeat at Ethos 7, but intelligence suggested they were regrouping and adapting to the new threat posed by the Alliance. Other ancient enemies of the dragons began showing interest in the humans, testing whether the new pack kin could be separated from their dragon protectors. David found himself appointed as the first human Drachnari liaison, a position that required him to travel constantly between human colonies and dragon territories, Spark accompanied him everywhere, serving not just as transportation, but as a living symbol of what the Alliance could accomplish. The young dragon had become something of a celebrity in both cultures. The lost hatchling whose rescue had changed the fate of two species on one particularly memorable mission. David and Spark encountered their first Ravager probe since the battle. The mechanical scout was investigating a human agricultural world, apparently testing whether the Alliance extended to all human settlements or just military targets. The probe's destruction took less than 5 minutes, with Spark demonstrating combat techniques that blended dragon power with human tactical thinking. But the real victory came when the probe's final transmission was intercepted. The Ravagers were beginning to understand that they now faced not just scattered dragon packs, but an organized alliance with resources they couldn't easily calculate. The agricultural world's colonists threw a celebration that lasted 3 days, with humans and dragons sharing stories and food around massive bonfires. David watched children who had never seen a dragon before climbing fearlessly onto Spark's back for rides, while dragon hatchlings born since the Alliance played games with human technology they found endlessly fascinating. "You know what the best part is?" David asked Spark as they watched a group of mixed-species children building something that looked like a cross between a human fort and a dragon nest. Spark's response came not in words but in images and emotions, the sense of completion that came from being part of something larger than yourself. The joy of watching two very different forms of life learn from each other, and underneath it all, the deep satisfaction of knowing that simple kindness could reshape the universe. 3 years after the Alliance was formalized, David received word that changed everything. The deep space monitoring stations had detected something unprecedented, a massive fleet of unknown vessels approaching from outside the galaxy, transmitting on frequencies that predated even the oldest dragon records. The ships weren't Ravagers, weren't dragons, weren't any known species at all. "First contact," Admiral Torres said during the emergency briefing, "again, but this time, we're not meeting them as lone humans struggling to understand the universe. We're meeting them as part of an alliance that spans thousands of worlds and millions of years of experience." David looked at Spark, now full-grown and bearing the scars of dozens of battles against various Ravager remnants. The dragon scales had developed new patterns over the years, incorporating metallic threads that caught and reflected light in ways that seemed almost technological. The bond between them had deepened beyond anything David had thought possible. They were no longer just allies or even friends, but something closer to two halves of a single consciousness. "Ready for another adventure?" David asked. Spark's response was a sound like distant thunder mixed with wind chimes, full of anticipation and fierce joy. The dragon spread wings that could now blot out small suns and turn toward the approaching unknown, with the confidence of a being that had faced the worst the universe could offer, and emerged victorious as their ship departed for the rendezvous point where first contact would take place. David reflected on the journey that had brought them here, a dying creature in a cave, a simple decision to help, and consequences that rippled across the galaxy. He had no way of knowing what these new visitors would bring: war, peace, knowledge, or challenges beyond imagination. But whatever came next, humanity and dragonkind would face it together. The universe was vast and full of wonders and terrors that no single species could handle alone. But it was also full of opportunities for those willing to extend compassion across the void between species, and David Chen had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could echo across the stars for generations to come. Behind them, Harmony Station continued its work of building bridges between worlds, while ahead lay whatever new chapter would be written in the ongoing story of the alliance that began with one human's refusal to let a small creature die alone. And somewhere in the space between, Spark sang the ancient songs of the dragons while dreaming of tomorrow's adventures